The following transmission is between myself and Tom of the Robot Radio Network, a podcast network operating shows such as the Fallout Lorecast series, Starfield Lorecast, Lord of the Rings Lorecast, and many more. Over the course of our conversation, we talked about podcasting and content creation, the future of Bethesda's most popular series transforming into modding platforms, and what that might mean for both gamers, gaming, and what sort of future that might bring. This is the Atomcast, and the best way you can show your support is by subscribing to our Patreon, as your monthly contributions will go towards improving the quality of transmission, as well as helping to decrease the time between uploads. As always, links to our Patreon, as well as guest socials and all other socials, will be linked in the description below. Without further ado, Tom.
All right. Hey, we're back.
We're back. Look at that.
Look at that.
Normally what I do
I
at
hear you have some questions for me, huh?
yeah, just a couple. Normally the way that my podcast goes about it is we usually start with just like, because like I have like a bumper bit at the beginning where I just kind of like give a brief explanation of like who you are, the kind of stuff that you do. It's usually just pretty straightforward. Like, this is Tom. He does podcasts, the Fallout podcast, the Fallout lore podcast. Now he's got the Starfield one, stuff like that. But one of the things that I find it's always good to have is just like hearing hearing the guest talk about what you do specifically. So more so like in your own words, like how would you describe like what you do to, you know, the layman on the street? You meet somebody on a bus and they ask like, what do you do?
Yeah, no, this happens all the time where I meet people and they're like, what do you do for a living? And I've learned you got to keep it short because otherwise, public quick little conversations, you don't have forever to give them your whole story.
Yeah.
So basically, at this point, I say I run a podcast network, the Robots Radio Podcast Network, and I host 5 of my own shows. And that's usually where I start off.
You
And I'm
host
like,
5?
that's what I do. Yeah, I
I
have
was only
5.
aware of 2 of them.
Yeah, I currently do the Fallout Lorecast, the Starfield Lorecast, like you mentioned, the Elder Scrolls Lorecast,
Oh
the
yeah.
Mass Effect Lorecast, and the Lord of the Rings Lorecast.
Oh
And
wow. So it was
Fallout and
real
Lord of the
awkward
Rings.
when I was shitting on the Amazon Lord of the Rings TV series.
No, it's like everyone has their own opinions. I don't think it's a perfect season by any means. But I think that there are some core things that they did well that
Yeah.
hopefully they expand on the next season. It continues to improve and all that.
Fingers
So
crossed.
yeah, but yeah, the Fallout Lorecast and the Lord of the Rings Lorecast are actually my biggest 2 podcasts.
I'm not 100% surprised on that, especially with Lord of the Rings. Everybody loves Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, so when I launched the Fallout Lorecast, this was like right before the pandemic hit.
Mhm.
A year before the pandemic hit, I think. And then it evolved from there. But in that sense, one of the things I learned, and you and I talked a little bit in the pre-show, I've had a very varied career doing lots of different jobs. I went through a job transition where multi-billion-dollar companies merged, and the people who ended up in charge of my section of the company got rid of a bunch of us. And I had a non-compete for like a year. I live in Florida. It covered like the entire state. It was ridiculous. And so I went through this thing about it was 8 or 9 years ago, where I was like, okay, well, I was doing really well in my career. I had a really nice job, and I all of a sudden couldn't work for a year. And so I was like, okay, what do I do? And I've always dabbled in content creation and doing side projects. I've played in bands. I currently do my own music on the side too, under the New Star Gods is my band that you can find on
Nice.
Spotify. I used to tour in bands, and this is like 20 years ago.
Right.
I've done a lot of things on the side, and a lot of those side projects I've noticed it's really hard. It's really hard to find an audience.
Mhm.
Discoverability is really difficult. And one of the things I figured out is that there are a lot of really good content creators out there making really cool stuff. And that's not the problem. The problem isn't that they have a hard time making cool things, because usually they come up with some really cool things. The
Mhm.
hard part is getting it discovered. It's the marketing side. So looking at my own career, I was like, well, I can wait a year, which sucks,
Yeah.
or I can take a job doing something else. And so I was like, well, what if I go into marketing? and I just start from the bottom and work my way up again, which I've already done multiple times, actually two different times, two different career fields. And so that's what I did. I started working for some startup companies. I ended up working with a marketing agency. I ended up running the SEO department at a marketing agency, the search engine optimization.
Mhm.
So in doing that, not only did I further a new career and kind of get back to a place where I was, making good income again, but I also learned a lot from working with people who are brilliant at doing everything from creating thumbnails, that go up on your YouTube video to the language that you would use in the things that you put in your information in order to keep people reading, or social media posts, or how advertising actually works, or search engine optimization, which is very, very focused on discoverability
Mhm.
and getting your stuff found. And so after doing that for a few years, I was able to take some of those concepts and apply them to what at the time was my newest podcast. I did a Dungeons and Dragons podcast for a while that didn't work. I'd streamed years before on a very regular basis until I lost my job. And then I was like, well, I got to be doing other things than just streaming now. And I
Yeah.
need to find a job. Um, and then I basically applied that to the Fallout lorecast and modeled the concept around the delivery of information in a fun and entertaining way, trying to do high quality audio as best I could at the time, and also finding a niche. Like that's a very important thing when you're launching a product of any sort, is to find an audience and a demand for the thing you're making. And like go back in time 5 years on YouTube, you had all of these Fallout lore videos still from the whole Fallout 4 buzz and then Fallout 76 coming out. Guys like Oxhorn and a number of others were hitting it big, doing all these Fallout lore videos. But none of them were releasing the audio onto audio platforms.
Mhm.
And so when you searched Fallout podcasts on audio, it was a lot of these chat shows, which were entertaining, but they weren't doing here, let me explain this lore to you. This is why this is more interesting than you may have noticed when you played the game, or that kind of stuff. So I was like, well, maybe I could do that. And so I started and I did it, and it grew and it continued to grow. And then I launched the Elder Scrolls Lorecast and did something very similar with that. And it worked as well. So when I got to about almost 2 years ago now, when I was thinking about launching the Lord of the Rings Lorecast, it was a very different market, because if you search Lord of the Rings podcasts, most of them are lore podcasts.
Right.
Because what else do you talk about? There's not like, I mean, other than an occasional TV show that shows up, it's not like there's a whole bunch of new Lord of the Rings books being written or anything,
Right. Like speculation on what the next book's going to be about. Like, what do you
Right.
mean next book?
That's not how that works, right? So what people are doing is they're going and they're talking about all the lore and all the other works that are, behind the big, the movies and the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit and the ones that most people know about, all of that stuff.
Mhm.
So that was a big challenge for me, because in some ways I entered into a space with almost no competition, right? Like launching a lore audio podcast when there's nothing else out there. As long as you do a good job of it, there's an audience. And so hopefully they'll find you. So that part made sense, and that was relatively easy because I found the niche. And a lot of shows that succeed just find their niche. This, it's like there wasn't really a niche. It's like, okay, what is there, a sub niche inside that niche somewhere?
Right.
And so that's what I figured out, was that in listening to a bunch of those other shows, nobody was going methodically through books like the Silmarillion, which explain the background to the world and all of that. But they're dense. They read like the Old Testament. Like they and it's archaic language. It's really, really dense, and there's a lot of really cool literature stuff going on there. There's a lot of really cool history and mythology, and things being drawn from other sources. And so I was like, okay, well, what if I just go through in order, almost like a read through? And I'm not actually reading it, but like I'll quote sections.
Mhm.
But if you decided to read through certain parts of the book, and every week you'd like listen to my interpretation of that, you would get a better understanding. And after a certain amount of time, you'd make your way all the way through the book with a much deeper understanding, and it would be enjoyable to do. And so that's what I did, and it worked. And so that was like a big surprise, because I was entering in a place with a highly competitive, without finding a real niche in for something that was absolutely unique.
Yeah.
And it worked out. So that's kind of my roundabout story for what I'm doing now and how I'm doing it. And I've also got some other podcasts, and now have also running a network, and there's other shows on the network, and people sign up for the Rocket Club, and I help teach them a lot of the things that I've figured out about launching your own show and getting it discovered and formatting it in certain ways, and creating good quality and all of that.
Yeah, showing people how
Very
to like get their start.
Yeah, yeah, and how to like what things actually matter. I think that's another thing that a lot of people, a lot of what I see is a lot of attention being put into places that don't actually matter,
Mhm.
which is weird to me because most of us are video gamers and everybody understands how to min-max in a video game. But when it comes to creating your own content, somehow that concept goes out the door. Do you get what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah, I think it's because in that's it's interesting that you phrase it that way. I never really thought of it that way. I think it's because in like video games, there's like a select number of options, right? In the
yeah,
most
yeah,
case.
and you know what the options are. They show up on the UI, you know which ones you can click, you know which ones you can maybe uncover by doing some sort of achievement
Yeah,
or some sort of goal in the level in order to get the thing or
yeah,
whatever. Yeah, it's like it's laid out easier.
right.
But if you take the time to figure out, like if you made a list as a content creator of like these are all the things I do. I record an episode, I edit it together. I promote it on social media, and then you create the little subsections for each of these. These are the steps I go through when I record the episode. These are the
Mhm,
steps I go through for editing. These are the things I go through when I post things on social media, whatever. And you actually analyze like how much time you're spending on each thing and what you're doing and how much of an impact that actually has on the thing that it's supposed to impact.
mhm,
So the impact could be discoverability. It could be growing increasing the number of listeners or viewers to your content. It could be just improving the quality of the thing that you're doing and getting better at making the thing you're making.
mhm,
Like there's lots of different goals, right? And certain things, if you just think about it for a minute, help more than others. So if you're working on creating better quality video, posting things to social media, you would think doesn't really do that unless you're editing other variations of that for video for social media.
mhm,
Now it furthers that goal, right? Like the big question is discoverability. How do you create a thing and then get people to find it? And a lot of people will say, well, you absolutely need social media out there. And
mhm.
so what they do is they set up, say, an X or Twitter account. I'm just going to call it Twitter.
Yeah, nobody
Set up
calls
a
it
Twitter
X.
account.
Nobody at all.
Right. Nobody calls it X. Yeah. So you set up a Twitter account and you start posting things on the Twitter account. And most people treat that as just kind of, well, I'm just going to post my thoughts, things I like, things I don't like. Whenever I have a new episode, I'm going to promote it. I'm going to put it on there. They just do the kind of natural thing,
Mhm,
but they don't actually come at it with any real goal or strategy.
mhm,
And what they don't realize is that if you are creating content for a specific audience, then everything that you put on that, let me start this with a big if you're planning to use your social media account for discoverability rather than just your personal spaced event and share what you think, those are two very different things.
mhm,
Um, if you are specifically sculpting a social media platform as a means of discovery, then everything you post should be content that your target audience will enjoy.
mhm.
Is that you think they'll enjoy. So if you have a Fallout page and then you post about the election, you're hitting the wrong audience.
Right.
It's not that you can't care about both things. You can do that on your personal account, sure. Do that on your personal account. But if you're creating a Fallout page, then don't post about the election, right?
Yeah. It
Because
got
that's not what your audience wants. Your audience wants more pictures of badass looking power armor
right.
and clips from video game stuff and the thing that you found in 76 that you've been trying to get for the last 2 weeks.
Mhm,
Like that's the stuff they want. And so a lot of people don't take the time to really focus in on things and then ask the question of, is this actually moving the needle or not? And I think if they did that, they'd realize that, like, if you count up your hours, the amount of time that people actually put in social media and spend doing social media stuff,
mhm,
and the amount of time it actually increases the number of viewers to their content is strikingly low. It is highly inefficient. Unless you're creating very specific content that you're putting on social media, and that content is now drawing people to your other content. Um, it's it's a complex thing when you think about it, but when it actually comes down to it, it's really just, are you putting content out there that people like? And so they like it and they want more of it and it shows up at the top of their feed. And then now you're top of mind. so that every so often when you remind them that you have a podcast out there or a YouTube channel or whatever, they go, "Oh, yeah, yeah, that's a thing too." And then eventually they check it out because they
Right.
were already a fan of your other content.
How do you sort of square the kind of people who make like like video essayists? Like for example, there's one specifically I think of, but I always forget his name, and that really bums me out because he makes like really good essays. But another one that comes to mind is a guy named Super Eye Patch Wolf, who has made a lot of different essays about. He's made essays about different manga. Sorry, I don't know how to pronounce it. Either way,
Right, right,
the
sure.
weebs are going to get mad at me.
And this is a YouTube channel
Right.
specific?
Yes, yes. He's made essays about different kinds of anime, manga. He's talked about, if I remember correctly, at least two different TV series, a handful of video games. He made this like really shit posty video talking about Space Jam, where it spun off into this whole thing like, oh, I got like the original copy of what Space Jam was supposed to be, where fucking I forget the name of the basketball player who was in this. Uh
The
who was it?
original Space Jam or this
The
the
the the second one, yeah.
I haven't even watched it.
Yeah,
I can picture his face in my head, but I don't remember.
yeah, I can't remember.
I'm sure everyone's gonna yell at us again. They're like, "I
Right,
can't
it's
believe
gonna
you guys don't
be
know this."
you idiots.
Names
um
don't stay in my head.
but like it spun off into this whole thing where like originally like the original script was supposed to be like this like live interactive experience. Bugs Bunny would die in the movie, and then I think was it Kobe Bryant.
Probably. That
Yeah,
sounds
like
fair.
Kobe Bryant would get like so mad because he was in like love with Bugs Bunny, and he would like transcend universes, and then like he would actually they would be the movie itself would be shown in like special theaters, and like Kobe Bryant would show up in cuts in like other movies playing, and then he'd like leap out of a hidden like a trap door in the movie theater and start hurling basketballs and people. It was this really weird, like it started off as kind of like a more serious thing and then spun off into like oh okay, he's just like shit posting now. But
Yeah.
he makes these like he made one about like Garfield, which was really good. The like abundance of Garfield like paraphernalia just that exists for this comic strip that showed up like every weekend in the funnies.
Right,
Um,
right. Like it got real big in the 80s and 90s, and
yeah,
everybody
yeah. There's
for
like
some reason had a
phones.
Garfield
There's
t-shirt. And it was like, what are you
stuffed
doing?
animals,
Yeah.
televisions, just like everything's Garfield, and he did a whole thing about that. But he makes these videos, and he only uploads, you know, like once every like several months. And as far as I can see, like going back into his content and stuff, I've been watching him for a while now, but going back, he's kind of always had that sort of like upload schedule where it doesn't seem like anything is super, you know, like continuous. Like it's not like once a month or once a week. It's just
Right.
kind of
It's not
like
just one topic either. He kind of
yeah,
jumps.
yeah.
Yeah.
He kind of diversifies. Obviously, I mean, to his credit, he's also a streamer, so maybe that plays into an account. But like, there are just essayists like that who don't really seem to have much of a presence besides those like big long form like project related things. How do
Right.
you square
Like,
like
how
that?
does that
What's
work? Like,
yeah, like what's the science
how do they make
behind
it?
that?
It's so here's the science behind it. They may have other things on the side, like streams and things that help drive people to their content,
Mm,
but most likely it's discoverability through YouTube itself.
mm,
If you think about search engines, the biggest search engine everybody knows is Google. The second largest search engine in the world is YouTube.
mm,
Not Bing. It's not some other typical search engine. It's YouTube. YouTube is also owned by Google. So by extension, YouTube and Google are the same thing.
mm.
They're just part of a diverse ecosystem of things.
Right.
That partly because if you search something on Google, you're going to get YouTube results in the videos that show up on the list or whatever. Right. So when you're somebody like that and you create really good quality content, but you only put it up out every 2 or 3 months, quality trumps quantity when it comes to YouTube, at least in the last few years.
Mhm.
So there's trends that happen with the way the algorithm changes and things like that.
Right.
What YouTube values the most is click-through rate, watch time, and return views. So if you, and this is why clickbait thumbnails and titles work so well,
Yeah.
is because it gets people into your video. Once you get people into your video, if you are entertaining, informative, or especially both in a really engaging sort of way, then they stick around. They watch most of your video. They see one of your video posts pop up again because they probably recognize the style of the thumbnail. They
Mhm.
probably have a very consistent style when it comes to thumbnails, even when the topics are diverse. Um, and then YouTube compounds on itself. If people continue to watch multiple videos from the same YouTuber, you go to your homepage, what are they going to recommend when one of those new videos drops? Right at the top of your list is going to be another one of those videos.
Mhm.
So it's a quality thing, and it's leveraging most likely discoverability through YouTube. And so they're using, like, there's a science behind what things people are more likely to click on for thumbnails. Um, one of them includes faces. It's why the trend over the last few years has been like everybody's got a wacky surprised face.
Right.
That works. If you look on mobile games, most mobile games have a picture of a face for
Mhm.
their thumbnail. um, we as human beings are drawn to faces way faster than other things. Text, you actually is kind of like a negative.
Mhm.
Oftentimes our eyes bounce off of text. We don't want to do the work to read a thing because it means more thinking. We would rather see an image. They've even done experiments where like just a character in the center of the screen that you recognize with an engaging face with no text and a not a very busy background
Mhm.
is actually more engaging and drives more clicks, especially when paired with a controversial title,
Mhm.
something in the title that makes you go, "Wait a minute, I got to see what this is." And that works. It's the reason why everyone hates clickbait is because clickbait gets you to click.
Right.
Then after that is where you build your reputation. So if the clickbait, if the if you click on something and you enjoy the video and it actually matches the thing that the title said, then it's
Mhm.
not clickbait. It's only bait if you feel resentful of having clicked on it.
Right.
So somebody like that is probably pairing really engaging titles with very easy to identify thumbnails. And then when you actually watch the videos, like you're saying, you kind of enjoy them because
Mhm.
they're giving you something in a way that is engaging and informative and you didn't know before. And their delivery is interesting. The way they edit their video together keeps you watching from one moment to the next. There's a lot of these like little things that, like I was saying, like you spend a lot of time posting stuff on social media, but if you actually just spent maybe 5, 10 more minutes editing in a little bit better at doing your videos or practicing recording and reading your voice and listening back on it over and over and over again in order to make yourself sound more engaging,
Mhm.
or watching people who do really good videos who get a lot of engagement and then going, why does this work? Oh, listen to the pace at which they're talking. Listen, look at the way that they are using the video in a way to really emphasize the points they're making. Look at how they use their thumbnails, their titles, those kinds of things.
Mhm.
Um, that's the path. Like the time doing that stuff is going to pay off way more than, oh, just post another social media thing because maybe people will see it.
Mhm.
Like you do that, let's say you spent, let's say you don't even spend that much time on social media. Let's say you spend 2 hours every week doing that. Imagine how much better you would get at making video and audio content if you practiced 2 hours a week.
Mhm.
Like that feels so different. It's so easy to just spend 2 hours on social media in a week, but actually like buttoning down and practicing doing things like a skill and getting better and better at that a year later, like that would be over 100 hours of practice that you have at the thing that you were doing. And I bet your videos and your content would look so different than what they did before. And especially if you're now experimenting by posting them online, seeing which videos get more clicks, trying to understand how certain things work, who your audience is, what they're actually responding to. I mean, this is another thing that I'm constantly surprised by. Like I'm almost at 300 episodes of the Fallout Lorecast. You would think I would understand who my audience is, but
Mhm.
I'm still surprised sometimes when I look back and I go, "Oh, more people watched that video this week. Weird. I wouldn't have expected that one. I thought this video would be more popular, but more people wanted to click on this or this this audio episode or whatever." Like you never know. It's why science works, right? Like you
Right.
can't predict results until you test it.
Yeah. Bring
So
it.
I know that's a bunch of stuff, but I think that actually might be what's going on there.
It does make a lot of sense when you kind of like, sit down and like really like start mapping out processes and stuff like that. Because I get asked like all the time, like, should I I have this idea for content, I have that idea for content. And I just always tell people like, hey, just like get started, figure out what it is you
Yeah.
want to talk about specifically, do it, and then like it from there it just kind of depends. Like, do you want to be somebody like I don't know, I'm trying to think of somebody like do you want to be somebody who uploads like every single week, but it's like, a more condensed like essay kind of video, so like, anywhere from like 20 to like 30 minutes in length? Do you want to upload like every single day, but it's like a more simplistic style where you're like something like, like the Game Grumps, for example,
Right, right. Like
where
daily stuff works well for like news and things
yeah,
that right in the moment you got to get something up immediately.
right, like
That stuff
what
doesn't have a long
like
tail.
what Moist Critical does, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So like that's there's two different methods for YouTube content creation in my mind. There's and even in podcasts, you could do this with podcasts too. There's timely news type focused content, which can get a lot of clicks real fast,
Mhm.
but then there's tail because after a day nobody cares.
Right.
Um, and or there's evergreen content where you are taking something like a video essay or something, or like like a lore podcast like mine,
Mhm.
where you know 4 years from now, if you go back and listen to the episode about super mutants, it's still going to be valuable information.
Right.
Now, maybe we get some new games coming out and they expand the lore of the super mutants, so I have to do a follow-up episode that talks about the new stuff we've learned about super mutants,
Mhm.
but that still doesn't mean that that first episode isn't valuable. That information still applies.
Yeah,
So that this kind of content actually has a very long tail and can grow exponentially as long as there's still interest in the topic.
that makes sense.
So there's the two different kind of methods of going like through that. I talk with new creators, especially that join the Rocket Club all the time about this. And I find that I went through the same thought process as myself. Everybody kind of comes at content creation from the same angle.
Mhm.
They get an idea for something that they think sounds fun, and then they go, how do I do that? Can I make it? And then they start thinking about the logistics of making it. But they
Mhm.
start with the thing they want to make. And if you do that without ever thinking about the opposite side of that, of is there an audience that wants this thing, then it's a crapshoot. You're
Mhm.
just grabbing a lottery ticket and you're hoping there's an audience that's out there for the thing that you want to make. And you're lucky if those two things line up.
Right.
What's more likely to happen is that you start with a concept. Oh, this is the thing I want to make because I think it seems fun. And then you look at the audience out there and you go, oh, but they want something a little different from this.
Mhm.
And you learn to sculpt your original idea into something that's still enjoyable for you to do, something you might still feel like you're an expert on or whatever, or have something to say, but you're able to then sculpt that and shape that in a way that fits what the audience is actually wanting. Those two things, that's more likely. Um, if you start with what the audience, if you start with the audience side of it altogether, and you just go, okay, and you can start even broad. Like, let's say you're into video games and you want to do a video game YouTube or podcast or
Mhm.
whatever, and so you make a list of like, okay, these are all the games I really really love. What and then you don't set yourself on picking any specific game yet. You don't set yourself on picking any sort of format, whatever. And you just look into the world of content creation for all of those things. And then you find the whole, that is way more likely to work in the long run. Like, let's say you happen to be into Fallout and Elder Scrolls and Resident Evil and Destiny 2 or whatever.
Hmm.
And you might even be hoping, oh, I hope I find something for Fallout, but you don't find a hole for Fallout. But all of a sudden you're like, oh wait, nobody's doing this Resident Evil kind of content. But there's content like that for all these other games, but nobody's really doing this. Or people are doing it, but I feel like I could do that better.
Right.
Then you pick that thing because now you found a hole in the market. You learn to fill that hole in the market. Hopefully that's still something you're gonna enjoy doing because it's a game you like, all of that stuff. You start there. And if you can do that and you can fill that hole in the market, you can start building an audience. And then if you can do that with that topic, then maybe you can like do a second show that does a similar topic with a different game or something like that. Now you've developed a brand. People know, like that's kind of what I've done. People know, oh, Tom does these lore casts
Hmm.
and he's into these RPG type games or fantasy worlds or whatever. So when I jump from Fallout to Elder Scrolls, it kind of makes sense. There's a lot of crossover between people who like both of those things.
Right.
If you jump from Fallout and Elder Scrolls to Mass Effect, well, there's some crossover there too. That makes sense too. What if I go to the Lord of the Rings? Well, yeah, there's some crossover there too. So it allows you to kind of expand out. And if I were to look at all of the shows that I'm doing currently, those 5 shows, and I've done more shows. I've handed off some of the shows I used to do, like the Dungeons and Dragons Lorecast, Cyberpunk, and The Witcher, to other hosts who are now doing those shows on their own.
Uh-huh.
If we went back 10 years and you were to say, hey Tom, if you were to do a lore podcast about any topic, what would it be? I probably would have said Lord of the Rings because that was probably my first love when it comes to fantasy worlds and all that kind of stuff. Because I read those books when I was much younger and I was really into Tolkien stuff when I was a teenager.
And
And
but you said before that the first like lore podcast you did was for Fallout, and the
right,
most recent
right,
one you did was for Lord of the Rings. Why
right.
why was Fallout like the first one you did a
Right.
podcast for?
It's because I love all of these things, but I didn't even consider Lord of the Rings to be a potential because it seemed like the market was so filled
Hmm.
at the time. And I didn't have experience doing shows like that yet at all. But because there was a hole in the market for Fallout, I was like, oh, I love Fallout. I'll do a Fallout lore podcast. I'll do it on audio. I'll see if I can make it work.
Hmm.
And so I cut my teeth on that. That worked. I did a number of other shows. And then 2 years ago, I was like, the idea popped in my head because deep down in my soul, I'm like, I really love the Lord of the Rings. It's like I was reading the Lord of the Rings stuff before Fallout even existed,
Right.
like the part of me that like it's just deeper in my being. And I remember debating, having conversations with my wife. I was like, do you think it's possible? Is this just gonna be a waste of time? Am I gonna just put a show out there and nobody's gonna find it? And like there's so much competition. And it's because I knew that there was a hole in the market for Fallout lore audio content. And I knew that that was something that I was interested in enough. I knew enough about. I was willing to do the extra research, and I did a lot of research early on, learning a lot of the things that I didn't know yet.
Hmm.
Uh, and still today for episodes, research before I actually do the shows. And I knew it was something I would enjoy, like something I definitely wanted to learn more about. So that's why I did that first. And it's not that I don't love it because I love Lord of the Rings. No, I love both things, right? Like if think about the things that you like, the fandoms that you are a part of,
Hmm.
the games you like to play. You love a selection of them, right? Like I love both. But there was one that was ready for content around a certain thing because there was a hole in the market. And there was another that seemed extremely daunting with a bunch of content creators who had been doing stuff for years. And I wasn't sure I could compete with that yet. And then after a few years of gaining the experience from creating these shows, from learning how to do this, and then coming up with a new angle on the content that could compete with what was out there, I was ready to launch that show.
Hmm.
Had I launched that show first, it probably would have failed because I don't think I would have had the experience or known what I was doing. Another thing a lot of people have hesitation towards when, especially when they join the network, is like, well, I don't know, if I want to launch this show because it may not do well or whatever. And they might have a really cool idea. They might have found a hole in the market. They might have all the expertise and knowledge, and they love the fandom, the product, all of that stuff, and yet they're still afraid to do it. And it's like, no, just go ahead and you have to start somewhere. You have to fail forward. So even if you did a dozen episodes about this thing and you didn't really ever really build an audience, that's a dozen episodes of experience you have recording, editing, creating content that you didn't have before. So if you figure out why that didn't do well and come up with another project and you try that, now all of a sudden you're starting ahead of where you were because of that level of experience that you've gained. So it's not a failure, it was a practice. And I think that's something that most people, it takes them a while to get past. And the truth of it is, if you put something out there in the world and nobody finds it, and then you remove it, it's almost like it didn't exist anyway.
Hmm.
It's like people can go back and go, well, look at all these failures this person had. Look at all this crap they made before. Like nobody would become a musician if you would point back at the first time they picked up their instrument and made it sound like a terrible
Right.
noise,
Yeah.
right? Like that's just not how that works. No, in fact, it's ridiculous to think that the first time you do anything, you're going to do it well. That's not how humans work.
What was
We
the
mess up.
what was the Oscar Wilde quote? Experience is just the name we give to our mistakes.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Exactly. So you have to like I did a Dungeons and Dragons podcast and it was an actual play with a cast. I was the DM. I edited it all together. They were their characters. We went on this big adventure. I spent all this time planning it. It was a ton to edit because those kinds of shows are a lot to edit because you have multiple voices and sound effects and all that stuff.
Mhm.
Basically nobody listened to it. It was like a few dozen downloads per episode. It was very very small. And I enjoyed doing that with my friends. It was fun to get together and do that, but it was a lot of work. And after about 6 months, one of the cast members decided that he wanted to move on and do something else. So we wrapped up the first season. We never came back to it. If I hadn't done that podcast, I probably wouldn't have been ready to launch the Fallout Lorecast because I learned so much from prepping and editing and planning and putting stuff online and dealing with hosting and dealing with social media to promote things and a lot of other stuff that if I hadn't had that knowledge, the Fallout Lorecast wouldn't have been successful. So do I regret doing it? No, because that was 6 months of intensive training that prepared me to do the first podcast that actually was a success.
Mhm. When we bring it back to when we bring it back to like the like the actual games themselves, specifically like because this is a Fallout themed podcast, and we've already talked a lot about Fallout, the Amazon series that's going to be coming out. That's what we talked about for pretty much like the first whole half of this
Right,
interview
right.
so far, practically. When it comes to like, I guess more so like the Fallout community, Fallout 4 modding, Fallout New Vegas, Fallout 76, stuff like that. How do you see things like going forward? Because we didn't really talk about that a lot when we were talking about the TV series. Good or bad, like going forward and like specifically like the future of Fallout 76. We're going to like I don't know. It's they mentioned we're going to like Shenandoah Valley, and it doesn't
Yeah,
seem like it's going to be an expedition. It seems like it's either
right,
going to be an expansion of the map that's already there, or like a way that we can just go to like a different map that's like a whole new gameplay area.
right, right.
And
Yeah.
especially with like Fallout 5 so far on the horizon. Um, how do you well, like what do you think that like in between area is going to look like? We got Fallout London coming out, we got the future of
Yeah.
Fallout 76, we got the
Well,
Amazon series. What's like between now and Fallout 5 going to start looking like?
all right. So yeah, I'll give you my predictions on this. We're gonna get the Fallout TV show. Hopefully it does well.
Mhm.
I can't predict how that's gonna go, but hopefully it goes well. We have 76 as an existing product that seems self-sustaining. They're gonna keep it going. It seems like it has enough players, enough income. A lot of people are still trying it out on Game Pass, like that kind of stuff, right? So that seems like it's set. We also have the addition and expansion of mods and paid mods to things like Skyrim. We know they're going to bring that to Starfield. We also know they're probably going to bring that to Fallout 4 with the big update that they've been teasing and haven't released yet.
Right.
So so from Bethesda's standpoint, and I've worked for tech companies and I've done some of this before. Their perspective is how do we what things are financially viable and successful, and how do we keep them going, and then how do we also add more to this Fallout realm while still juggling the rest of our other projects, right? We know that they've moved from Starfield into Starfield DLC slash the next Elder Scrolls game. That's what they're working on now. Fallout 5 is still way off on the horizon somewhere. I doubt we will see that in the next 7 years at
Mhm.
least. And I know a lot of people don't want to hear that. I don't want to hear that. I would love a Fallout 5, but I don't think that we're going to get that. So in the meantime, they're focusing on 76 and mod implementation. They want to turn Fallout 4 into a mod platform that allows things like Fallout London and other things to be created even more easily and sold so that people who make that stuff can actually get some money for their efforts and, pay their teams and those kinds of things,
Mhm.
which is fine as long as it's not gouging and terrible
Yeah.
in other ways. Like I have nothing wrong. If you are a programmer, a designer, somebody who's working on this stuff and you're putting hours and hours and hours in and you release a really awesome product, then sure, you should get paid. Yes, please do, like make more. Like I'm happy to pay some money for better content and have more things to do if that's something I'm interested in because it looks cool. So I think you're going to have that. I think you're going to have Fallout 76 continue as it's been going. And one of the big asks has been expeditions are fine, but why not just expand the map? Why not give us more quests, more map, more stuff, more creatures? Just like, why do these expeditions have to work like expeditions
Mhm.
when you could just make more quests and more map to
Right.
visit? So I think that it takes a ship like that a long time to turn. I think this is something they've been now aiming towards for the last few years, and we're finally getting through the previous content that was already scheduled and designed and worked on to get towards the stuff that is now moving in that direction. If they can keep doing that with 76, because it's a multiplayer, it's functionally very different from Fallout 4 because it's a multiplayer thing, and it's harder for people to mod that. You're going to have Fallout mod platform, Fallout 4, and then Fallout multiplayer, which is 76, and it's going to continue to grow with updates and things like that as long as the community is still there. The other aspect to all of this is now that Microsoft owns Bethesda, do they source out a new Vegas 2 from Obsidian or somebody else before Fallout 5 comes out? My guess is if Bethesda has a say, no, that won't happen
Mhm.
because they've already shot down in the past concepts for New Vegas 2 being done by Obsidian and other kinds of side projects. They want to kind of hold that stuff tight to them. So Microsoft might say, well, you don't get your say anymore. We're just going to do this because they can. So that might mean that we get that, and maybe that's good. Hopefully, it's well made and we enjoy it. Um, or they go, okay, we understand your reasoning. Maybe they make a really good pitch and they go, we understand your reasoning. We're hold off. So let's focus on Fallout 4 mod platform, Fallout 76 multiplayer, and then the TV shows, maybe mobile games or whatever. And we just have to wait a while to Fallout 5 happens. I think those are the potential futures.
Yeah. Because I mean, it does kind of feel like things are starting to trend that way. Because I can't remember like off the top of my head at this moment, but I think before Fallout 76 came out, they said that modding for the game was going to be, you know, something that they're like looking into, maybe like, year 2, something like that.
Yeah,
We're
yeah.
going
I
on
think
like,
they probably scrapped that.
yeah, we're
And
going on like
I
year 5 now.
Yeah, because the game is still isn't 100% stable on every platform all the time.
Mhm.
It still has its bugs. I mean, it's a lot better than it was.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's very playable, but I still see people complaining about how it crashes on PlayStation or whatever. Like there are still things that require more focus, have a higher cost benefit analysis to getting people to play than implementing mods that now somehow have to work on multiplayer.
Right.
And when that stuff happens, now anyone else who plays with you also has to download the mod. Like it's a very difficult nut to crack and to do well. So it makes sense to keep the mod platform to the most recent single player version of the game.
Mhm.
And that could mean that you build new maps. That could mean that you build new locations, Project London, those kinds of things. It's easier, and people are still going to want to play that stuff. So that makes sense. And Fallout 4 feels modern enough. It's not like going back to Fallout 3 tech, which really starts to feel old.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, it still feels modern enough that you could actually do that, and heck, even add mods to add, modern graphics updates and things like that to the engine and that kind of thing.
Mhm.
Plus, if they continue to update 4 with some of the things they've learned from implementing in 76 and Starfield, then we might end up with a even more dynamic platform for people to be creating Fallout content on.
I was actually gonna ask that. Do you think that a big part of why Bethesda is sort of saying like, no, we don't really want to work on like a spin-off game, like one of those like in between things, or like outsource a Fallout New Vegas 2. Do you think that part of the reason they're doing that specifically and focusing so much on like you said, turning Fallout 4 into a modding platform, do you think that that's more so that the games that can come out that are like the spin-off titles can be, Fallout London, Cascadia, stuff like that, to where it's like those are the spin-off games and they're made by the modding community?
Maybe. I think it probably goes something like this. What is the shortest way to us and money? Because they are a corporation.
Hmm.
Because that's how corporations work. That is, and this is another one that we talked about how like people misconstrue organizations, corporations, things like this.
Yeah.
The sole purpose of a corporation is to make profits for their shareholders.
Hmm.
That's it. Aside from that, if they do have some higher purpose, then that's because the leadership has a higher purpose at the time. As a corporation, then they will definitely have a profit motive. If the profit motive, if the calculations show that the amount of time and money invested into releasing a new spin-off game or a Fallout 5 or whatever doesn't give the same amount of profit per cost and time as updating an older game in order to charge you for mods, then it makes sense to do that first
Hmm.
because it's a faster way to money. Everybody and their mom has Fallout 4, probably a few copies somewhere, like
Definitely with Skyrim. Couple
yeah, definitely with
copies.
Skyrim, and they've proven that, right? Like everybody continues to buy Skyrim, and then they update it for mods, and hopefully, that works out in ways that we are happy to pay for it because it's good content, and the modders are making money off it, but they also get their cut because it's a platform. It's
Mhm.
like you don't launch a game on Steam and don't expect Steam to take their cut. Like they're going to take their cut, but hopefully you sell enough that it's also beneficial to you as well. So they're looking at it from that perspective. So if that's the perspective, then it's easier to update a game like Fallout 4 in order to have payable mods and also support the modding team because that creates that helps reinforce the community element. I'm sure they're aware that the reason why these games sell so well, one of them is because there's a wonderful community element around them. People who get together and love these games and talk about them online and build mods for them and all of that stuff. So if you help support other people to make content, put it on your platform, and then you make a percent of that content, that's a much faster and easier way to make profit than it is to spend 5 years on the next Fallout with the hopes that it sells. And maybe it doesn't.
Do you think that because it's interesting because like more of like as a retrospective, um that's something that Roblox has kind of been like that's kind of been like their jam for either as long as they've been around or like the past couple of years, and we're starting to see it more so recently with like more and more, not really like games, like full out and out games coming out of like Roblox specifically, but like a lot more well developed, tightly knit stories or like gaming experiences. I can't remember off the top of my head what the name of the game mode was, but I had an old coworker who would actually play a first person shooter game on Roblox, and he said that it was probably better than like any other like first person shooter at the time, like Call of Duty, Modern Warfare, stuff like that.
Right.
And it
Right.
was so much better than any of the other things he experienced. And, it's more or less, I think more or less it was free because he just played it on Roblox.
Right.
And I think with Starfield specifically, because Starfield feels a lot more like it was more so made with modding involved or in mind, like as a forefront thing. And they're like, all right, we're gonna we're gonna make an open game world. There's gonna be a thousand planets, stuff like that. Plenty of space for people to create. We're gonna make the engine and like the world as stable and maybe not like bland or
but
what
not
is
overly. Yeah, I get what you're saying.
yeah, we're
Bland
more
enough,
yeah, we're more
vanilla enough to add other stuff on top of it.
exactly. They're more with Starfield. They're more focused on like creating a base world for other stories to exist in that modders can then come in and
Yeah,
create stories within that universe.
yeah,
That
yeah, no,
sort of like
absolutely.
concept of making games that then in and of themselves sort of act as either modding platforms or game creation platforms like Roblox, modding platforms like Fallout 4, Starfield, stuff like that. Do you
Yeah.
think that is something that's like a net positive or a net negative for the gaming industry? And how do you think that, like, in general, fans are going to respond to that if it becomes like more of like a mainstream thing?
Right, right. Well, yeah, it's as with all of these things, you have to consider things from an angle, from a perspective. Me as a gamer, like personally, I want more. Like if they say, "Hey, we're launching Fallout 5 next year," somehow we've been able to put it together and we're launching it, and I get more official Fallout stories with Fallout characters and callbacks to the other games and expansions on the lore and that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
Absolutely, 100%. That's what I would rather have. Absolutely. Um, do I want a modding platform where I can buy mods and do other stuff? I could take it or leave it.
Mhm.
The fact that the games are moddable as it is enough for me. Does that mean we're going to get higher quality mods? And if I spend money on them, then I get better stuff and I get to play some of those things? Maybe I'll dabble in that and take some looks at it. But from a lore standpoint, none of that stuff is canon.
Mhm.
Right? Like Fallout London looks amazing. They look like they're doing a great work on it, but it also isn't canon. So it's a fun side story, but it doesn't further my knowledge of the actual Fallout universe. It's a fun, like, well, this is maybe what it would have been like over there. That's
Mhm.
great. So it's interesting in that way. It's not like it doesn't have any value, but it's not the same kind of value, right? That's different. Um, from the perspective of the fan base at large, I think there are going to be some people who love that stuff and some people who don't. Just like focusing more on building in Fallout 76. Like there is an audience that played Fallout 3 in New Vegas and 4 and 76, and the fact that you got more building in 4 and then even more building in 76, they love it and they make amazing, really cool things. I'm not, I'm fine with just building my little camp and just tweaking it now and then, and it just being one of a few little things that I can do in the game. But some people really love that, and that's their primary thing. And
Mhm.
if you were to take that away from the next Fallout release, they would feel like it was missing because that's most of what they go to Fallout for, or it's a large percentage of what they go to Fallout for at this point. Um, Everyone comes at these things from different angles. Like some people have spent so much time now modding Skyrim and Fallout that they just love checking the Nexus mods every week to see what's new out there and how to change up what's going on. And then they do videos about it and all that stuff because they love it, love it, love it. Again, for me, it's one of those things I dabble in when I just feel like it, but it's not something that's like a primary focus for me. So putting more emphasis on that for me doesn't do a whole lot beyond just kind of a fun thing to dabble in on occasion. Does that answer your question?
I mean,
I
like
think it comes from different perspectives.
it definitely does, because one of the things that I was going to challenge on that line of thinking, because we talked earlier when we were talking about the Amazon show, more so like the perspective, right? In the perspective of the show, I said, I don't really hope that like the NCR or the Enclave or like any other like big faction is present to, be like, like, oh, these are the major players. I want the story to be more of like a focused, finite, like character story, or like a local, community kind of story, a
Right.
beef
Right.
between smaller actors, not these big superpowers. And so I kind of uh I kind of challenged more so maybe like the like requirement for canonicity in exchange for something more as like lore friendly. So for example, Sim Settlements 2, for example. Is any of
Mhm.
that canon? No, most likely not.
Right. Is it lore friendly?
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
very lore friendly, and more so specifically,
Right.
it's a
And
story that feels like it could be canonized, but
right.
the
Right.
experience in and of itself is so incredibly well done that it lends itself to feeling like, oh, this could be a story that exists within the canon universe.
I think there's a solution to this. Well, first of all, I just want to say, just because something isn't quote canon
Mhm.
doesn't mean it has no value. Like
Right, and like that's what I'm
there
saying. Like,
absolutely are mods that I love that are not canon, and I'm just like, oh, this is great. This is so much fun. I
yeah,
really enjoy playing this. Like, and Fallout London may be that kind of thing. Fallout Miami might be that kind of thing where I'm just like, oh, I'm gonna eat this up. This is so much fun. But in my mind, I know that this hasn't been sanctioned by the storytellers or by by Bethesda specifically as canon. And
right,
there's a
but
little
when it
piece in the
comes,
back of my brain that knows that, right?
yeah, but when it comes to like the larger concept of like playing the games and like enjoying like what the experience is and how it relates to the rest of the gaming universe, because like, there have been spin-off games forever, and like maybe not 9 times out of 10, but a lot of times like they aren't canon. Of course, at least 40% of them are kart racers, so take it with a
Right.
grain of salt. But
Sure.
specifically, like if we can like say, Fallout London, for example, if we go through Fallout London, it's a fantastic experience, everybody loves it, but it's not canon. Is anything really lost or gained in that sense? Like, if the experience you get out of playing Fallout London is like, wow, the modding community is really good and they were able to make this like really great story, but is there any like real loss or gain in the fact that it was made by the modding community and thus is not canon? Or is it just the fact that it's just a good story that fits in the universe? Like, how
Right.
how
I think
dependent
that's
is canonicity?
yeah. I think I mean you're hitting on something absolutely. Like if it is high quality and it is good and it is enjoyable and it feels like Fallout, then there's nothing wrong with that.
Mhm,
There's like it doesn't need to be canon to be enjoyed. Like and heck, maybe we get through it and I'm like, that's the best Fallout thing I've played in years.
mhm,
That was amazing. And I've got this, high level of respect for the team and their writers and all of that. I'm like, this was amazing. This felt like a legitimate game, even though I know it wasn't like actual sanctioned game.
mhm,
Yeah, I think in the long term, like it doesn't really matter, but there's a in I think it's more about for me, it's more about what's the quality of the thing that's being made. And a
mhm.
lot of times, even the best mods have a certain level of unpolishedness to them.
Yeah,
And that's fine. That's fine. Like, it doesn't mean I don't enjoy it. But it's that little nagging reminder of like, well, this wasn't really officially made.
yeah,
But you could argue that parts of the game feel unpolished and unfinished
yeah.
too, and are
Like
legitimate
that.
parts of the game, right? But I think in the long run, when you think back about like and maybe this is just from having done a lore podcast for so long, but looking at the conversations that are debated online and all of these things, canonicity comes up so much.
Mhm,
People want to say, well, this happened at this location, and this is who was there, and this is what they did, all of that kind of thing. And because that does come up so much, things that don't fall under canon tend to get left behind and forgotten.
mhm.
And I think that's the danger. The danger isn't, am I going to enjoy this mod project? Because if it's done well, I probably will. I'll probably play it. I'll probably like it. Like I'll probably be happy I played it. I might have had an amazing experience. I might have had yeah, maybe the storyline was so good and I cried or something, like, oh my God, that was so good. Like that is all 100% possible. 10 years from now, when everyone's going, Fallout 5's out and let's update the lore and let's debate new lore topics, those side projects aren't going to come up because they don't fall under canon.
Right.
And
But
it's kind of a shame in a way. Like maybe the way to solve that is to have a project, any project like that, that's a story project, be submitted to Bethesda and then be canonized. Maybe they read through the script or maybe they play through the game or whatever and they go, actual lore masters or, the writers or whoever's on their team who has authority can go, this doesn't contradict in any way the other stuff. we were going to add this to our archives. So now these are characters that can get referenced in official releases in the future. And you've got the stamp of canonicity. And if that, even though they didn't make the game, if they were to approve it and deem it so, 10 years from now, when people are talking about canon, they're going to reference that project. And I think that's probably the bigger thing here in my mind, is that the stuff on the side eventually will just disappear. But everyone still talks about Fallout 1 and Fallout 2
Right.
25 years later, 26, 27 years later, you know? Um, and I think that there's a reason why people debate canon. It has inherent meaning by definition that you don't have if you're not that. So maybe there's a solution to that. Maybe it's a vetting process now that they submit these things to the official mod system or whatever.
Mhm.
And, you know, heck, you could even have authors write novels and
I
submit them to Bethesda and say, hey, I've expanded the story of Fallout 4 or whatever.
I was
Here's
actually
my
going to
novel.
say that because I was like, well, first of all, I really like that idea, like the whole like submission and canonization.
Hmm.
Primarily because that makes me think of Todd Howard draped in a long purple or
Right.
red orb, and he's
Right.
in like the
Religious
welcome
ceremony where
the
he like waves.
council.
Yeah.
The council will
He,
judge your
he
mod.
pours the Nuka Cola over the thing. And then, yeah, like yeah.
Into the
Um,
chalice.
yeah, yeah. But I think that does two things. It really, really legitimizes the fan base and the people working on mods.
Right.
It gives people a goal to shoot for. And maybe you can even achieve that by submitting the scripts before even finalizing the game. So you know if it's going to be eligible for canonicity or
Mhm.
not. But then it also expands out. I mean, if they want these things to be a platform, why not have, I mean, people are writing fan fiction all the time. Why not have fan fiction writers put together novels and maybe you've got like Fallout 4, The Institute, Aftermath, or something like that, right?
Well,
And
that's kind of
submit
what
it.
I was like. That's kind
Yeah.
of what I was running towards, because like you could, because like if we go off the concept that games like Fallout 4, Starfield, stuff like that are supposed, they're trying to turn those into more like modding platforms where people can make those larger spin-off stories like Fallout. I was gonna say Nuevo Mexico, but that's New Vegas. But the big mods that are being made for Fallout 4, London,
Sure.
Cascadia, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Those can kind of be like the what is it, like the spin-off games, or like the in-between games between like big like mainstay game releases, because games take so long to make these days.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
they also, along the lines that you were bringing up with like fanfic writers and stuff like that, what if Bethesda specifically started also along the at the same time as making these main tentpole games like Fallout 4, Fallout 5, stuff like that. They also worked on outside projects like the TV series, or
Right. Right.
like, maybe a novel series like you mentioned. And what if those those mediums from Bethesda's point of view is how they sort of evolve and maybe not redefine, but like solidify bits and pieces of the actual canon of their games. And then when like a big game comes out, it's like, this is the stuff we've done with like the canon and the lore and stuff like that. And now here's the product that we put out, the next big tentpole, and all
Right.
the stuff
Right.
between those games that the modders can create. Those are more so like the kind of like oh, like this could be a story that's out there in the wasteland, and
Yeah.
B, the stuff that sort of tides people over between these like major tentpole games, Fallout 3, Fallout 4, Fallout 5, stuff like that.
Yeah, I think that's totally a thing. I think from a business perspective as well, if you launch Fallout London and you put it out for free, who knows? Millions of people could download it,
Yeah, yeah,
right? Like lots of people own Fallout 4. Um, if you put out Fallout London and you put it up on a Fallout version of Fallout 4 that charges you, let's say it charges you $15,
yeah. Mhm.
play Fallout London, they'll make some money off that because a significant portion of the population is ready for something and they're willing to spend $15 on a mod project they're gonna have dozens of hours to play through. So that sounds good, right? But if you were to canonize Fallout London and then put it up on the store, how many more people would then buy it?
Mhm. A lot.
Or if you were to canonize a novel, like maybe that you allow different writers to submit their stories and they go through a vetting process, and certain ones are picked and then canonized and released, and Bethesda keeps a cut of the novel sales, but the author gets most of it, and now you have a canonized novel. I mean, lots of people read fan fiction, but if you have an official canon novel that goes out, that number will, like, it'll be 10, 100 times more people who would pick that up. And then Bethesda makes money off of that. The content creators and modders make money off of that. And the fans get more official canon that helps, like you're saying, tide them over to the next big release.
And because it's
And it,
also a book series, you get Matt, Pat, and the game theorist team talking about it, and that drives
yeah.
content.
Right. Or it shows up in my show. Like, it's one thing for me to do an episode on Fallout London and be like,
Mhm.
hey, this is a cool game. You guys should go check it out. It's a really fun mod. They did a good job. Here's some of my favorite stories. It's another thing for it to be canonized. And then I go, well, this is interesting. Bethesda has said that these weird super mutants you come across are now actually canon, and there's a reason why they're different.
Yeah,
Let's go into it. That
yeah.
all of a sudden becomes a ton of new content that you could put even just on my show.
Brings in the
And
speculation and the theory, and then that churns
yeah,
out just more content. It just keeps the wheel a spinning.
right, right. So I think you know, looking at canonization, because that's kind of what this conversation has revolved around,
Hmm.
as being this, like, well, there's only a few things that can really be that, and everything else is going to be on the side, but it's okay to still enjoy those as well. That's kind of the feeling of that,
Yeah.
and turn that, flip it on its head, and go, well, canon content can be good content created by other people as long as it's vetted and approved.
No, yeah.
That becomes like, that's such an open thing. And I think the next thought then would be from Bethesda's side, well, you have to pay somebody to do this.
Hmm.
But if the potential of new income coming from people buying mods and buying books, that's going to well pay for that person's job. to just be to spend time vetting this stuff and making sure that it's approved for
Right.
canonicity.
Yeah.
As long as Todd Howard is willing to allow somebody the ability to approve that, which
To allow them.
right, because I mean, he's very, and I'm not trying to be, snippet. He's very careful about what things he puts out and what things he deems, approved, and
Hmm.
all of that. Like, there's a reason why Starfield took so long to make, because they were being very careful with the game that they put out. And I think, like, to go further into this, the reason why everything takes so long, and the reason why they're trying these other methods of monetization and expanding into movies, it's partly because game development just keeps taking longer and longer and longer.
Hmm.
And it's a bigger and bigger risk. And when you are a business owner, you want to minimize risk. So spending 7 years working on their most recent title is a huge risk because it takes a lot of time and money. If Starfield didn't sell, that would have been potentially studio ending.
Yeah.
I mean, every time they release a new game, they're rolling the dice. And chances are people are going to buy it. But if they buy a game and then everyone goes, oh, this is hot garbage.
Hmm.
And I'm not talking about like some people on the internet or the people who are like, well, I don't really like Starfield yet, but I'm waiting for the expansion. Hopefully there's more story and I'll buy
Yeah.
that.
You're talking
Like,
about like the average
I'm
person.
I'm talking about, like, it gets a 10 on Metacritic, like
Yeah.
10 out of 100 on, or 1 out of 10 on Metacritic. Like, it absolutely just flounders.
Yeah.
It's like some of these other games that have come out recently where they're like, well, we sold, there's 10,000 concurrent players right now. And it's like they were hoping for a million.
Yeah.
Like, that is catastrophic.
Yeah.
And there's a very real chance that that could happen. Not necessarily because they made something bad, but even just the fact that, like, popular sentiment turns around, or people talk about how this game just isn't good anymore. Nobody likes it, and content creators all flock to the negative videos, because they get clicks, and then all of a sudden, 7 years of work completely tanks the franchise.
Do you
Um,
think that's what's happening with Starfield? Because it seems like every article for like the past couple of months that I opened, like, oh, like Baldur's Gate 3, here's how it's doing compared to Starfield. Pal World,
yeah,
here's how it's doing compared to Starfield.
right.
Helldiver 2, here's how it's doing compared to Starfield.
Well,
Like,
it's a very easy meter stick
mm,
because we know how many they've sold. We know they're kind of a big tentpole on the horizon. It's a big studio that's released games like Skyrim and Fallout 4, which have sold millions and millions of copies. It's a very easy metering stick. It's also now owned by Microsoft, so there's of course expectations on that. So you've got all of that. My sense of Fallout, or my sense of Starfield, is that it's the first time we get a first version of a new series from Bethesda.
Hmm.
And one of the reasons why it feels shallow compared to something like Fallout or Elder Scrolls is because by the time Bethesda launched Elder Scrolls 3, they were standing on two full games of content, plus Van Buren, the Fallout Bible, like other content that was out there about the world that expanded and it made it feel like we were already entering in a deep and interesting world,
Yeah.
even if you never played Fallout 1 or 2. They were pulling from so much already.
Yeah.
By the time most people jump into Elder Scrolls, most people didn't start with Arena. They started with Morrowind or Oblivion or Skyrim.
Yeah.
And those games already have massive amounts of lore behind them that made it feel like a really interesting and dynamic world. With Starfield, you're starting at zero.
Hmm.
And you have to explain in that one game some of the things that have happened and still keep them interested in characters and the storyline and the plots and the planets they're going to and all of these things, while also trying to build this into a platform that they can expand on and build more content around and have people mod and do all of these things. So it's a really, really big task, because to compare it to something like Baldur's Gate isn't fair. Baldur's Gate wasn't doing those other things. They were just writing interesting stories with all sorts of different ways things can play out with the characters. Starfield didn't try to do that.
Hmm.
Starfield tried to give you these stories with these characters, this main engaging story, these locations, and this amount of history in order to then move on to the next stage, which is
Hmm.
more DLC and then maybe a sequel and some other things, and a platform that other people can mod on top of, and all of that. It's an apple and egg, or apple and orange
Yeah. It's the egg and then
kind
it
of thing.
hatches into an apple. But it starts as a
They're two
tree.
very
It's
different things.
I think somebody misexplained biology to me.
Yeah, they're very different things. Now, does that mean that I don't wish that some of the things that you can do in Starfield have like more, like there's more characters you can kill outright
Yeah.
than the ones that are protected? Absolutely. I want to kill all the terrible people on the Freestar Collective board.
Yeah.
But they just take a knee and then the guards attack you.
Yeah.
Like, yes, I want that. Do I want multiple ways that things could play out differently based on conversation and dialogue, like in Baldur's Gate? Yeah, absolutely. Do I want certain kinds of things to be a little bit more visually interesting, like they are in Cyberpunk 2077? Sure.
Mhm.
Yes, I would love all of that. But I don't know that we're ever going to get all of that all in one thing while still trying to do the other things that they're trying to do with it. It's kind of too much.
Right.
But for some people, like if you read the what is it, like the non-salty subreddit for Starfield, there are lots of people who absolutely love the games. This
Mhm.
is the best experience of my life. This game hits me just exactly the right way. This is the space exploration game I've always wanted. Like, those kinds of comments are all over the place. So there is a large population that really, really does love it, love it. So that means that it's not terrible. It's not flat out bad. It just doesn't do certain things that some of the other games that they're known for do as much. And it also shows us a progress. If you chart the progress from like the early Elder Scrolls games through Fallout, when they get Fallout, and then those games, and then Skyrim, and then Fallout 4, and then Starfield, there's less player agency as you move on, and the games become focused more and more and more just on the limited set of things that you can choose to do.
Mhm.
And the purists out there are going to go, well, I long for the days of Morrowind where you could just kill Vivek and ruin the game. It can never actually have a canon ending,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. I think the solution for that, and I hope they work this into future Fallout games, is a toggle in the options menu that says, "Al- allow me to kill essential NPCs."
Yeah. Make it like I was playing Pacific Rim, or not Pacific Rim, Pacific Drive, which came out the other day. And in accessibility, this was actually something that somebody in my stream at the time told me, which I probably would have never known and probably would have gotten demonetized, because I don't pay too much attention. I don't pay enough attention as I probably ought to, with like sound based settings and stuff like that. But there was an actual like streamer mode in the settings where it
Yeah.
won't play music that's going to get you demonetized.
Right. Yeah, this is the thing that's pretty common is they'll have these like streamer modes
Yeah,
for most recent games, or a lot of them.
yeah,
Um, yeah,
and
so something like that that like allows you to kill essential NPCs and then pops a notice on your screen that says like you've killed an essential NPC. This might totally screw up your quest lines, your games, like that you may not be able to complete certain things and we can't predict what will happen. Are you okay with that?
mhm,
Yes or no? If you hit no, it reloads you to right before you killed them and then you move on.
yeah,
Like
it gives you
that.
that accessibility option.
Right. Give the players at least the choice.
Mhm,
That's what I want. And then and I also think it would be really interesting if they updated quest and dialogue stuff continually and like into the future. Like maybe it doesn't matter what the game is, Fallout 4 and you're with one of your companions, or Starfield and you're with one of your companions, and you make decisions that then affect the way they like you, but in ways that feel more and more real over time. Like they update those things or they expand other quest lines. Like why you could have a DLC that's like, oh, here's some new planets and some new main storyline to go do over here, right?
mhm,
But why not also add in like a second character focused storyline for your companions? Like not just a new companion, but like let's say Sarah's your favorite companion.
mhm.
You've already romanced her. What if there's a second loyalty set of missions out there that go further with your relationship and other dynamics in the history of that character and people that they know and those kinds of things? Like people would pay for that. And maybe it's part of a big DLC. Maybe it's a $10 little expansion where you get more stuff from Sarah, and eventually it's lumped into some, you know, awesome, super awesome bundle a few years later with all the DLC or something. Like
Yeah, the game of the year version.
right, you could add through extension all the updates into a game like Starfield or Fallout 4 that you would want, that the community's been asking for, that weren't there initially. Still charge for them, some of them. Hopefully, give out some of them for free,
Yeah, and
and
updates and
then
stuff like they've been
in
doing.
updates and stuff. Yeah. But like the big ones, you charge for the big ones, and maybe some of those make fixes or whatever.
Mhm,
But you can do all of that, and then at let's say 5 years from now, we're looking at Starfield, and it's a completely different game, just like 76. It's a completely different game.
mhm.
It's like it's there are pieces in there that are from the original design of the game, but like there's so much that just wasn't. And now, when you read a review that came out like the month the game released, and then you actually play the game, you go, "Oh, well, this game doesn't even do that anymore."
Yeah. Do
Like
you
you
th-
could, that's the thing. You could update all of that
do
stuff.
you think that Starfield is gonna like, especially with the concept of like Bethesda's concept or the potential concept, because we're really just theorizing here. Obviously, there's a lot of strong evidence for this, that, and the other thing, but I mean, we don't know.
Yeah,
Todd Howard could come up on the next game conference and like, yeah, so we did it. We made the thing that everybody wanted, Fallout kart racing, and then just fuck off into the sunset, never come back again.
fair.
But in the current concept that we have going here, the little theory that's rattling around between our brain cells, with the idea that Bethesda is more so making games that are more like modding platforms in the overall, like the general concept, do you think Starfield is kind of like a one and done, except, obviously making it more mod accessible, and then obviously releasing like, updates, DLCs, patches, and stuff like that? Do you think that Starfield is going to kind of become something a little bit more akin to No Man's Sky, in the sense that it's like, because like the story of Starfield feels pretty succinct. Obviously, there's a lot of like background lore and stuff that they can expand on with, DLCs, updates, expansions, patches, this, that, and the other thing. Do you think that Starfield is going to exist in that sort of thing? A one off game that just has a lot of stuff added to it constantly, like No Man's Sky? Or do you think it's actually going to get a sequel like Skyrim, Fallout, literally any other game?
Yeah, I bet this is something that they're debating right now because of the length of time it takes the main studio to release each game.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we're looking at a Starfield official sequel, like we are probably not getting the next Elder Scrolls for at least 4 years, would be my guess. By the time they're finally putting everything together, written, created, all of it, right?
Yeah.
We're at least 4 years out. So that's 2028.
Hmm.
If at its fastest, they put out Fallout 5 after that within the next 4 or 5 years, you're now
2030-ish.
2033.
Oh,
If
okay.
it
Got you.
takes
Got you.
another 5 years from that to get to Starfield 2, you're at 2038.
Hmm.
That's a long time away.
Yeah.
It's hard to plan anything out that far for video games because what do even games look like in that many years from now, right? In
Yeah.
16, how many of those? 12 years from now? Like 12, 14 years from now?
Something like
Um,
that. Yeah.
something like that. That is so hard to predict. So I have a feeling that decision is on the back burner. What I hope they come to realize is that they can do kind of a more of a No Man's Sky focused kind of thing with
Hmm.
this and continue to just release more content. I think that totally makes sense. Like the first DLC doesn't have to be the first of like the traditional X number of DLC that we put out per release.
Yeah.
That like, what if the first DLC adds in some new planets, we get more storyline for a certain part of the game, and then another year and a half goes by and we get another DLC and it's more story content and maybe they've updated some of the other things. And then those sell well because they've got this many people and they've continued to update the game and make it interesting and add new stuff in it and do some of the things that people were hoping were going to be in there. And then another year and a half goes by, and then we get another DLC. Or it becomes this kind of it's legitimately a platform,
Hmm.
right? You can mod stuff in, but then they are also participating in the modding stuff in with official content that just keeps going until it stops selling. This is one of those things I've always thought was weird. Like, why did we only get so many DLCs for Fallout 4 or for Skyrim initially? Like they go through this period of time for like the next 2 years or so where they release on a schedule all the DLC that comes out. They did it with Fallout 3, they did it with New Vegas, and then they just stop because they want to make the next game.
Hmm.
Why not designate a certain part of your studio as just like they've done for 76 and they've even outsourced some of this as the people who continue to make content for this thing that people are still playing.
Like what they did with Rust, for example. Like Rust 10 years ago looks like a completely different gaming experience from a completely different time in history. And it seems like every month they're dropping like, oh, here's like changes to the map. Here, like now you can build like
Sure, sure.
CCTV cameras,
Or
drones, new
or even
cars.
just at its smallest bit, here's just more story and characters.
Yeah.
Like here's a reason to spend another 10, $15 and come back into the game for another 20, 30 hours or
Yeah.
whatever and play through some new content. And maybe then you decide, oh, I'm going to do another replay of the main story. And then you realize, oh, they've made some changes there too. This is cool. And then, you take a year off, you play other things because it's natural to just kind of go play other stuff.
Yeah.
And then they've got another release, and you're like, oh, there's more about this character that I really like. That's cool. I'm going to get back into that, and I'm going to play through it. I don't see any harm in that, like, especially if it's not sapping resources from your ability to move on to the next big title and all of that stuff. If something like that makes enough money and sustains itself, and you have a team of, say, 40, 50 developers all just kind of siloed off working on that, and it sells and it supports itself, and it makes money for the company
Hmm.
and fans like it, why not? Why not keep doing it?
Yeah.
Like, and maybe there's a reason. Maybe there's a good reason. Maybe it's the whole like, well, we don't want to wear people out, like the MCU problem. That could be it too. So maybe just take time off and then put more stuff out again. It's not like it's, I don't know. It seems like there's more flexibility around these things that would create more content in ways that we would all enjoy than what has been tried yet, I guess.
In a time of more so upheavals, unrests, worries, stresses in both real life and the gaming industry. A lot of people are, you know, running to video games, media in general, as a form of like escapism. And obviously, then there's different kinds of media that sort of like because art is a reflection of real life, and that just bleeds into the media that we consume because the media is in art and the art is the reflection of real life, so it's a vicious cycle in a way. What is maybe what do you do and or what do you advise people to do to sort of take on the different medias and create in a way that is both, you know, sort of not really embracing that escapism, but like following the escapism, but also being able to then turn around and reflect what they create or what the experience with that, like, you know, view of reality in the surface of what they make or in like the rear view mirror.
So like as a creator, how
As
do
a
you like,
as a creator, as a gamer, how do you stay grounded and like how do you stay grounded but also like aware and like optimistic at the same time?
yeah, I think not spending too much time on social media
Oh
helps.
God. Okay, that's it. That's the podcast. You nailed it right
I, I think
there.
that's the solution. I think the death of joy is loving a thing, like playing a thing or loving making content for a thing, and then seeing a bunch of people be negative about it.
Hmm.
Not even your creation, but just like, man, I just got through that new, expedition in Fallout 76, and that was a blast. And then you're browsing Twitter or Reddit, and people are like, oh my God, I can't believe they make you do this in the expedition. I hate it.
Yeah. You just see all
And
the
then
all the people talking about all the negative aspects.
right. And you just got done playing and you were like, no, I had a lot of fun. What's wrong with you guys?
Yeah.
Like, and I think that to the Fallout community's credit, especially fans of 76, they've done a really good job just like closing their ears to a lot of the naysayers out there and saying, well, I have fun, so I'm just going to go have fun while you guys all complain.
Hmm.
And I think I think this is deep down really a human question. How do you stay true to the things that you enjoy, the who you are, and not feel like you have to justify yourself to a greater, social dynamic that's out there saying something different. And I think that's something that we all have to justify, like, and it happens in video games or happens in your taste in music or movies or whatever, right? Like, well, like maybe you're like, well, I really do like Nickelback. And I'm like, cool. Okay. You know, I'm
You,
like,
you
have
so you
fun with
say
that.
you say that in kind of like a judgy way, but I think I was literally just having this conversation with like my chat in stream or like in a Discord server. Like Nickelback is like the band that everybody says is awful, but then they
Right.
hop in their
Right.
truck and they blast like, you know, it's like
Yeah.
Saving Me or like.
Right. Right. But that's how that goes, right? You say I like this thing that is publicly usually shot down,
Mhm.
and the other person, me in the conversation, looks at you like, okay, sure, cool. Like they don't know what to say about it because they're like, why would you admit to that? There's that
Right.
like that awkward feeling of like, I'm supposed to hate that, so aren't you supposed to hate that? Why would you be proud of that? Right. And it creates this weird social dynamic, and it happens online, it happens all over the place. And it happens in video games and things like that a lot. And I think that just comes down to us just being okay with who we are and understanding why we like the things that we do. And there's nothing wrong with saying I like Nickelback, and then the other person going, okay, cool, I guess. And then you can go, well, you know what? That most people don't realize about Nickelback is X, Y, and Z. And this song really resonated me at a certain important part of my life. And I know why I like this. And the fact that everyone else doesn't like it is fine. They don't have to. That doesn't matter to me. Like you don't have to be antagonistic in your defense. You just have to understand why it is you like a thing and then be okay with that. Like if you actually dug into it, the reason any two people like playing the Fallout games will probably be different in certain ways. There are probably people who are they just really love Nuka-Cola for some reason. I mean, Nuka-Cola is cool, but it's not the first reason I play Fallout, you know? But
Hmm.
like maybe some people just really, really love the way the artwork looks and the idea of like soda, and they just love drinking soda, and like that's a thing for them. And even though that doesn't resonate with most of the audience, that doesn't mean they're wrong. It just means that they just need to understand, look, no, that is why I like it. I really like this. I want to make a Nuka-Cola camp in my 76, characters base, like whatever. And that's totally fine. Maybe I really like it because I want to read every terminal and I want to learn all the lore while playing through the game, which is what most people skip over. That's why they listen to shows like mine, so that they don't have to sit there and read in the midst of rather shooting things, right?
Hmm.
And maybe you'd rather shoot stuff. It doesn't mean you and I are wrong. We just love two different aspects of the same thing. There's nothing wrong with that. Maybe you love science fiction and I love fantasy. We both love forms of fiction. Neither of us is wrong. We just probably need to understand why we pick the one we do. Like the fandom type of stuff, like the arguments around fandom is so silly. It's not politics and it's not religion, right? Like
To some it
none of
is.
some it is, but that's the thing is that like politics, debating politics is a life or death thing because legal policies, laws will determine who lives and dies. Religion is potentially a life or death thing, depending on how literal the actual reality is there around the things that you believe, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like those are life or death things. The enjoyment of a video game, what bands you listen to, that's not life or death. That's just taste. And maybe somebody has different taste than you do, and maybe they have different taste than the majority. But that's fine. Own it. Like the most attractive, this is one of the things I learned as a young man. The most attractive thing you can do, you can do is be confident. A average looking person who walks into a room confidently is more attractive than an attractive, like stereotypically attractive person who walks into a room looking like they're scared of the world. And that's how you treat your fandom. Like, well, this is what I love. Oh yeah? Well, yeah, no, I really love it. I really love it. And this is why. That becomes attractive. In fact, being the counterculture sometimes can be even more compelling than falling into the majority.
Thank you for listening to my conversation with Tom, founder of the Robot Radio Network. As always, if you enjoyed this episode of the Atomcast, the best way you can show your support is by subscribing to our Patreon, as your monthly contributions will go towards improving the quality of transmission, as well as helping to decrease the time between uploads. Until next time, I thank you so much for listening, and I will see you all out there in the wasteland.